Chris Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. At the start of Julianne Genta's speech, she started off in actually quite a generous and kind-spirited way, talking about how actually parliamentarians across the House agree on actually a few things that would make New Zealand a better place, that children shouldn't grow up in poverty, that we need secure housing, that we all agree we need jobs and economic growth, and we need to think about how we protect New Zealand's natural environment. And that is actually true. I think all parliamentarians here actually, when you boil it down, agree on the type of New Zealand we want to live in. But where we disagree is on the methods. Where we disagree is on how we get to that point. And actually, too often, I think, in this House, and actually we hear it a lot from other Green members, too often members on this side of the House, on the government benches, get accused of hating the poor, about hating... you didn't say that. That's my exact point. You didn't say that, but too often your colleagues say that members on this side of the House get accused of hating the poor and enjoying the fact that people live in poverty and need a helping hand in life. And nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, the disagreements are around the method. So I want to commend Julianne for the start of her speech, Ms Genta for the start of her speech. Sir, around the world, the values of openness and multiculturalism and the idea that countries should engage and be interconnected with each other on the world, those values are under attack. Whether or not it's the rise of Trumpism in the United States, with metaphorical and literal walls being built to shut America off from the rest of the world, or whether or not it's Brexit, in the United Kingdom, where one of the subtexts of that debate was a rebellion in some ways against migration into the United Kingdom and globalisation, or if it's the rise of Pauline Hanson in Australia with, quite frankly, very alarming and distasteful rhetoric about people of the Muslim faith and other ethnicities, or if it's the rise of the right in Europe, people like Marine Le Pen in France. The values of multiculturalism and tolerance, of engagement with the rest of the world, being welcoming of foreign capital and labour, those values are in some ways under attack, sir. And we are actually in an interesting time in global history, because globalisation, I put on record for the House, has been manifestly and overwhelmingly a force for good in the world. In the last 15 years, extreme poverty has been halved, largely due to globalisation. Countries engaging in trade, companies and individuals engaging in trade and interconnectedness in the global economy. And that has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in Africa, in China, in Southeast Asia, in poor parts of the world that have for far too long been trapped in a poverty cycle. So we need to make the case for globalisation as a force for good, but at the same time we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there is angst and disquiet in many communities around the world, in the United Kingdom, Australia, States, and including in New Zealand, of people who perhaps have missed out on the gains of globalisation. And that's a challenge for all governments. But it's a challenge that is accepted by this government. And it's a challenge that Bill English and Stephen Joyce and Paula Bennett and the finance team absolutely accept, of taking all New Zealanders with us so that we all share in the gains of growth, but also realising and being cognizant of the fact, as many speakers on this side of the House point out repeatedly, New Zealand's future cannot lie in returning to the 1970s-style Fortress New Zealand economy of that era. It does not lie in putting up the shutters and trying to wall ourselves off and insulate ourselves from the rest of the world. It absolutely must lie in things like trade agreements like TPP, and free trade agreements like Korea and like the economic partnership with Taipei. It must lie with interconnectedness with the rest of the world, so our exporters can sell more on the world stage, so that our fast-growing IT companies can get access to markets offshore and sell their products and employ Kiwis who then provide for their families. It has to lie in that, because we discovered in the 1970s that trying to subsidise our way to prosperity and trying to put up tariff barriers so that we could protect and defend our domestic industries just led to inefficiency, and in the end led to job losses. And the transition to being part of the global economy was all the more painful because we denied for far too long that we could do that. We pretended that we could just live behind tariff barriers and live in a world in which we didn't need to engage with the rest of the world. And the Labour Party led the charge for New Zealand entering the world economy from 1984 onwards. And that's their proudest legacy. If Labour stands for nothing else, or if Labour is proud of nothing else, it should be proud of those changes. And the unfortunate reality is, and the great big divide across the House these days, is between who stands for an open, confident trading New Zealand and who stands for the return to the politics of the past. I call it the politics of nostalgia, because there are a lot of people in New Zealand who have tried to present a revisionist version of history and tried to imply that New Zealand of the 1970s was a nirvana, when in reality it was anything but. And The Economist magazine says the big divide in politics these days is between open and closed. It's not about left and right, not about rural and urban, not about the other traditional dividing lines, conservatism or socialism on the liberal side of the spectrum. The big dividing line is about open and closed. And this government stands on the open side of the ledger, absolutely stands on the open side of the ledger, that our future lies as an open trading nation that welcomes foreign capital and welcomes foreign migrants to New Zealand, and that it knows that our future lies, as David Bennett said earlier, in that Asia-Pacific growth hub that we are so connected to. We are an Asian nation, and that's where our future lies. And it's regrettable that a Labour Party that has such a proud history of opening New Zealand to the world is now opposed to TPP, increasingly opposed to foreign migration, and actually very, very sadly resorting to childish and frankly deeply unpleasant stunts like the Chinese names debacle that I think even Phil Twyford regrets from last year, but unfortunately he can't undo the damage he's done and the hurt he's caused to Chinese communities, the hurt he has caused to people of Chinese backgrounds who live and have lived in New Zealand for over 150 years. And it was Helen Clark that apologised to the Chinese for the poll tax in 2002, and that's all been undone, unfortunately, by Mr Twyford. Oh, Annette King says rubbish. Well, clearly Annette's not going around to events in her electorate. She's clearly clearing the way free for Andrew Little to run in Rongotai, because if she'd bothered to talk to people in her community, she would know that that was deeply offensive to Chinese people, deeply offensive. Sir, this is a budget that continues New Zealand's path to being an open and confident market economy. That pathway of the last 30 years, it increases funding for taking advantage of those trade agreements that the New Zealand government has signed. It funds things like the New Zealand Story, which allows which is going to help does help our exporters. It increases funding for Education New Zealand so that we can attract international students into New Zealand, a very large export industry for New Zealand. It increases funding for tourism, a sector that's going extremely well and welcomes people into New Zealand to take advantage of our natural environment and take advantage of our outdoors. It increases funding for innovation in our economy. The important is increasingly the motor of our economy, our fast-growing ICT sector, our technology sector, like we have out in the Hutt Valley, or as I call it, Technology Valley, sir. It increases funding for the Pre-Seed Commercialisation Fund. It increases funding for science and innovation, that important part of the economy, an increasingly important part of the economy. Sir, this is a confident budget delivered by a confident government, sir. It's just a shame that parties opposite that have been so strong in the past on an open New Zealand are actually standing up for a closed New Zealand.